The knife found my ribs before the wheels stopped rolling, and the girl who pressed her palm flat over the wound to hold my blood in had no idea. She just put her hand on the king of Imberfall. "Don't move," she said, which was absurd because I could barely feel my legs and had no intention of testing them. "You'll open it wider." I wasn't planning a dance. "You were planning to die quietly in a stranger's lap. I'd rather you didn't." That was the whole of it, really the shape of her, before I knew her name. Blunt and steady and entirely unimpressed by a man who was, at that moment, still a stranger to her in every sense that mattered. The coach had been taken 2 miles into the Greywatch Pass, where the road narrows between rock walls high enough to swallow torchlight, and no outrider can flank a blockade set well. I'd counted 6 raiders before the first blade found me, a lucky strike through a gap in armor I'd worn precisely so no one would look twice at it. Guardsman's leathers, no crest, no color. A wounded nobody, traveling 3 stops behind my own honor guard under a name that wasn't mine, to shake anyone counting heads at the border gate. It had worked. That was the trouble with it working. I was now a wounded nobody in truth, bleeding in the dark among strangers, and the only person who'd come to my aid was a woman half-turned toward the door herself, as though she'd been deciding whether to run before she decided to stay. "Compartment's wrong," I managed. "This one's booked." "So's the one I fled. There's a man back there missing 3 fingers and very interested in mine." She had the coach's spare cloak wadded against my side already, pressing hard enough that I hissed, "Hold that. Don't be brave about it." Outside, the raiders were working the strongbox off the roof rack with an axe, arguing over the noise. Ordinary bandits, by the sound, greedy, undisciplined, more interested in cargo than passengers. Not what I'd braced for when I'd chosen this road. Not, I would learn before the night was through, what they actually were. "What's your name?" she said, not quite a question, checking the wound by feel in the dark, quick and sure as a woman who'd done this before and hated wasting words on people who might not live to hear the rest of the sentence. "Cass," true enough as far as it went. "Yours?" "Wren," a beat. Her hands didn't slow. "Not really, but it'll do for tonight." I laughed, which cost me, and she told me to stop it, and I found, even bleeding into borrowed cloth with raiders arguing 20 feet away, that I didn't mind being ordered about by a woman who had no idea whose orders she was countermanding. The axe finally split the strongbox with a crack that sent the whole coach rocking. Voices rose in triumph outside. Wren's eyes flicked to the compartment door, to the thin strip of torchlight under it, then back to me, calculating something I couldn't yet follow. "They'll come through the cars once they've got what they want," she said, "looking for anything else worth taking. Rings, boots, you if that leather's worth stripping off a corpse." "Comforting." "I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to get us both out before they open that door." She was already working her arm under my shoulder, testing whether I could bear weight, and finding, to both our displeasure, that I mostly couldn't. "Can you stand?" "Given sufficient motivation." "The motivation is the 3-fingered man." "Move." We went out the compartment's far window into a drainage cut that ran along the base of the pass wall, low enough that the raiders' torches didn't catch us, loud enough with running water that our own noise vanished into it. I do not remember all of that first mile. I remember the cold of the stream soaking through my boots, and Wren's shoulder wedged under my arm taking more of my weight than she let on, and the strange, floating clarity that comes to a man who has lost more blood than he ought to admit. We didn't stop until the coach's lantern glow was long swallowed by the rock behind us. She lowered me against a boulder with more care than the pace of the last mile had suggested she had left in her, and knelt to check the wound again by touch, since there was no light to spare for looking. "You're a physician," I said. It came out slurred at the edges. "My mother was a healer, so was hers. I grew up learning hands before I learned letters." She said it flatly, the way people recite things they've stopped finding remarkable. It's not a trade you can fake convincingly, which is more than I can say for some things. Such as a guardsman's leathers that fit a different man's shoulders. She didn't look up from the wound. You're built for something looser through the chest, court dress maybe. Or armor with a crest they made you take off. I went very still, and not from the cold. That's a bold guess for a healer's daughter. I didn't say I was guessing. Finally she looked at me, a long, unhurried, assessing look, the kind I have had turned on me by generals and by physicians, and by exactly no one else in a decade, because everyone else in my life has long since stopped looking at me and started looking at what I represent. I'm saying I notice things. It's the same trade as healing, really. You can't fix what you haven't actually looked at. And what have you noticed? That you're hiding something larger than a guardsman's rank, and that whatever it is, it's the reason someone wanted you dead quietly, in the dark, in a coach no one important is meant to be riding. She tied off the makeshift dressing, sat back on her heels, and studied me with an expression that was not quite suspicion and not quite anything I had a name for yet. I'm not asking you to tell me. I've got my own reasons for being on that road under a name that isn't mine either. I just want you to know I'm not stupid, whatever else I am. I never thought you were stupid. My voice came out rougher than I meant it. I think you may be the first person in a very long while who's looked straight at me and only seen a man who needed help. Something crossed her face then, quick, guarded, gone before I could read it fully. Don't go soft on me from blood loss. I need you upright, not sentimental. But she said it gently, and she didn't move her hand from where it rested, steadying against my good shoulder. We found an old drover's shelter an hour before dawn, 4 walls of dry-stacked stone, and a roof more gap than thatch, the kind of shelter herders use when storms catch them between way stations. Wren got a small fire going with flint she carried in a belt pouch, feeding it slow and careful so the smoke thinned before it could be seen over the rock wall. You carry flint like you expected to need it, I said, watching her work. I expected to be running from a wedding, not a war party, but a woman learns to carry what she might need. She glanced at me, fire-like catching the set of her jaw, tired but not soft with it. You want the story or not? I want it very much. She told it plainly, without asking for sympathy, the way she seemed to do everything, walking me through it the way she might describe setting a bone, factual, a little clipped, letting the facts do whatever work they were going to do on their own. Her family held land 2 valleys south of the pass, good land gone bad under 3 years of failed harvests and a father who'd borrowed against it to keep them fed. The debt had come due in the shape of a marriage, a merchant's son from the border towns, a man with money enough to clear it twice over, and a manner, she said, that made her skin want to leave her body every time he touched her arm like he already owned it. He never struck me, she said before I could ask. I want that understood. It wasn't that kind of cruelty. It was smaller. The way he'd correct what I said in front of his friends, gentle as anything, like he was doing me a kindness by fixing me. The way he picked my dress for the betrothal feast without asking and smiled when I wore it like I should be grateful he'd thought of it at all. She fed another stick to the fire, watched it catch. 2 years of small things. You start to understand you're not being married. You're being acquired. So you left. I left, a short, humorless huff of breath, not quite a laugh. Walked straight out the kitchen door during the wine blessing in my second-best boots with nothing but the flint and what coin I'd been quietly setting aside for a year in case I ever found the nerve. I didn't plan past the border. I still haven't, honestly. She looked at me sideways. Your turn. Or does the king's business stay locked up tighter than that? I let the silence sit a beat too long before I answered. Not because I doubted her, but because I was, for the first time in longer than I could say, weighing what it would cost to simply tell someone the truth and watch what she did with it. I'm not ready to give you all of it, I said finally. Not because I don't trust you. Because the moment I do, everything about how you look at me changes, and I find I'm not eager to lose the way you're looking at me right now." She held my gaze a long moment, firelight moving between us. That's either the most honest thing anyone said to me in 2 years, or the smoothest lie I've heard yet. "Give it a few days, you'll be able to tell which." "I intend to." She banked the fire lower, pulled her cloak tighter, and settled with her back against the stone wall, close enough to reach me if the wound reopened in the night, far enough that neither of us had to name what the closeness meant yet. "Sleep, Cass. Whoever you actually are, I'll keep first watch." I meant to argue. I was asleep before I managed it, which tells you something about the wound, and something about how safe, absurdly, I felt with a stranger's back against stone 6 inches from mine. I woke at midday to the smell of something cooking over the fire, a rabbit she'd snared while I slept. She told me, with the particular satisfaction of a person who has just proven a point without saying it aloud. The wound had stiffened badly overnight. She cleaned and restitched it while I gritted through language a king is not meant to use in front of a woman he's hoping to impress, and she laughed at me for it, which I found I preferred to sympathy by a wide margin. "You're not a soldier," she said again, plainer this time, not a question at all. "I told you I was." "You told me your name was Cass, too, and I don't believe that either." She tied off the last stitch and sat back, studying me with that same unhurried assessment. "It's fine. I'm not asking you to be honest. I'm asking you to hold still while I finish, and to eat something before you fall over again." We stayed at the shelter through the day, both of us too worn and the wound too fresh to risk the road before dark. It was, I would come to understand later, the truest day of my life to that point. Not because anything remarkable happened in it, but because nothing did. We talked. She told me about her mother's herb garden, the particular stubbornness of certain roots, the way her grandmother used to test a student's hands by having them find a heartbeat blind, through 3 layers of wool. I told her carefully about a childhood spent being watched rather than known. A father who died when I was young enough that the crown came to me before I'd finished growing into my own shoulders. A council that had spent 2 decades managing me more than advising me. A restlessness I'd carried since boyhood that I'd never had a name for and had stopped expecting to find one. "What does it feel like," she asked, "this restlessness?" I considered the question longer than it probably deserved. "Like walking a road that curves, when you've only ever been told it runs straight. Like there's a direction I'm meant to be facing, and I've spent my whole life half a degree off it, close enough that no one else would notice, but I always have." She was quiet a moment, turning the rabbit on its spit. "That's a strange thing to carry." "I've carried stranger things worse." "Such as?" "Such as being right about people wanting something from me every single time for as long as I can remember." I looked at her, really looked, for the first time letting myself do it without the caution I'd been rationing since the coach. "You haven't asked me for anything since you pulled me out that window. Not my name. Not my coin, though you must know by the cut of that leather I have some. Not even gratitude, really. You keep telling me not to be sentimental about it." "Would it help if I asked for something?" "No, that's rather the point." She didn't answer that, but something in her face eased, a guard lowering by some small, deliberate degree. The way a person opens a door they've kept locked long enough to have forgotten what light through it looks like. We ate in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, and when the fire burned low, she banked it again without being asked, and I found myself watching her hands do it and thinking, absurdly, that I had never in my adult life watched anyone do anything so ordinary and wanted so completely to keep watching. I did not understand yet what that meant. Some part of me, the part beneath the collarbone that had gone strangely warm and strangely still, the moment she first pressed her palm to my wound, understood it already, and was simply waiting for the rest of me to catch up. We left the shelter at dusk the next day, walking the last stretch of the pass road on foot since neither of us trusted a public coach again so soon, And the 2 days that followed were, if I am honest, the closest thing to courtship I have ever known, though neither of us called it that at the time. She taught me, on the second night, to read a wound's healing by touch rather than sight, guiding my fingers to the edges of my own stitching with a patience that had nothing performative in it. "You're the king of somewhere," she said, only half joking, testing the words the way a person tests ice. "You should know how to mend what's broken without waiting for someone else to do it for you." Is that a guess or an accusation? It's an observation. You carry yourself like a man used to being obeyed and hate it and don't know how to want anything else. She said it without cruelty, only that same unhurried honesty. It's not an insult, I've just noticed. You notice a great deal. I told you, it's the same trade as healing. She released my hand, and the loss of her touch left a strange coolness I hadn't expected to mind so much. Whoever you are, Cass, whatever you're really called, I don't think you're a bad man. I think you're a tired one, who's forgotten what it feels like to be looked at instead of assessed. I did not answer that for a long while, because she had put a name to something I had carried unnamed for 15 years, and I found I had no ready words for the strangeness of being seen so precisely by someone who still believed she knew nothing about me at all. On the third night, camped within sound of the river that would lead us to the Stagpost way station by the following dusk, she fell asleep before I did, curled close to the fire with the flint pouch still clutched in one hand out of old habit. I sat awake a long while, watching her, and felt the mark beneath my collarbone, dormant since my coronation, dormant if the old stories were true, since long before any king of my line had needed it, stir for the first time in my memory. Not pain, not even quite sensation. A warmth, faint and low, like a coal someone had breathed on in a dark room, waking toward a hand it somehow already knew. I did not understand it yet. I only knew that I did not want the road to end. The second attack came at dusk on the fourth day, a mile short of the Stagpost way station, and it told me everything the first one hadn't. 4 riders disciplined, cutting off the road ahead, and behind in a formation no common raider would think to use, pincer, patient, the kind of ambush laid by men who'd studied the ground beforehand rather than simply happened upon it. The man at their front said my name, not Cass. My true one, Ashworth Thorne, spoken like a debt come due, and I understood in that instant, with the particular clarity that comes only from mortal danger, that the coach raid 4 days past had never been ordinary banditry at all. It had been cover, a chance to separate one particular, poorly guarded man from a crowd of witnesses, on a road no one would think to search twice, arranged by someone who'd known my route before my own honor guard did. Someone on my council had sold me. "Get behind me," I said to Wren, already moving, cursing how slow the wound still made me, how much strength 4 days of healing hadn't returned. She didn't move behind me. That is the thing about her I have never fully managed to make anyone at court understand, when I try to explain why she is the only woman I would ever have chosen as Luna of Imberfall. She looked at 4 armed riders bearing down on a man she still, for all she'd guessed, didn't know the full truth of, and instead of running for the trees, she snatched up a fallen branch thick enough to serve as a club and set herself at my shoulder instead. I said behind me, "You're still healing. You'll drop in the first exchange, and then where will either of us be?" She said it like arithmetic, not bravado, eyes already tracking the rider's approach with the same unhurried assessment she'd turned on my wound the first night. "Tell me what you need me to do instead of what you need me to be safe from." There is a particular ache, I have learned since, in watching someone choose you before they understand what choosing you might cost them. The mark beneath my collarbone, which had only warmed and settled these last 3 nights, woke fully now, not pain, but recognition, sudden and total, as if it had been waiting the whole of my life for a hand it would know without being told, and had just found it, close enough at last to reach. The riders came on at a canter, closing the gap. I had my knife, the only blade I'd kept on me since the coach, small and poor use against 4 mounted men, and precious little else. But 4 riders on a narrow pass road cannot all reach a single target at once, and the lead man's horse, spooked by the branch Wren swung hard across its legs, reared and threw its rider clear before he'd landed a blow. I took the second man's leg out from under him as he dismounted to finish it on foot. Wren put the branch through the wrist of the third, who'd come at my blind side, and did not flinch when he screamed. It was not a long fight in the end. My own honor guard, 3 days early after all, having, I would learn, never quite believed my orders to hold their distance, broke onto the road within minutes, drawn by the noise of it. The riders who could still run, ran. The rest my captain's men took alive for questioning enough in the days that followed to name the councilman who had sold my route to men with no crest and no loyalty beyond coin. When it was over, Wren stood in the last gray light with the branch still gripped in both hands and blood on her sleeve that wasn't hers, staring at 40 mounted men in Imberfall colors, dropping to one knee in the road before a man they were calling Your Majesty. Cass, she said, very evenly, not lowering the branch, is not a common name for a guardsman. No, I admitted, it isn't. She did not run. I want that said plainly, because I have turned that moment over more times than I can count in the months since, and every time I do, I find myself grateful all over again that a woman who had just discovered she'd spent 4 days nursing a king back to health under a false name chose, in that instant, to lower the branch rather than flee into the dark. You could have told me, she said, once my captain had ordered the men back to give us room, once the 2 of us stood alone on the road in the settling dusk with 40 soldiers keeping a respectful, watchful distance. I know. You let me talk about my mother's garden. You let me teach you to read a wound by touch. You let me call you Cass for 4 days while she stopped, jaw working, and I understood she was not angry so much as recalibrating everything she thought she'd known about the man beside her, fast enough that it left her breathless with it. I let you see me, I said, before you could see what I represent. That's the only lie I told you, and I'd tell it again, because I don't think I've ever had 4 days like that in my life, and I wasn't ready to lose them for a title. She was quiet a long moment, the branch finally lowering to her side. And now I owe you an honest name and an honest account, and whatever you decide to do with either of them. I held her gaze, the mark beneath my collarbone still warm, still settled, still hers in some way I did not yet have language for. I won't make you a debt the way that betrothal made you one. Whatever you choose in that way station tonight, you leave it a free woman, with an escort and coin enough to go wherever you please, and my word that no man will come after you for having saved a king who lied to you about his name. Something in her face eased, slow and deliberate, like a door she'd kept locked a long while, finally admitting it recognized the hand at the latch. That's twice now you've said something honest to me instead of something smooth. I'm told it's a habit I'm only recently developing. Good, she said. Keep developing it. And she fell into step beside me on the road to the stag post, not behind, not ahead, beside, which I would come to understand was the only place she ever intended to walk. The stag post way station sat lit gold against the last of the dusk, its common hall loud with drovers and merchants settling in for the night, entirely unaware that the King of Imberfall was about to walk through its door in borrowed, blood-marked leathers, beside a woman, carrying a fallen branch like a weapon she hadn't yet decided to set down. We took a private room first, at my captain's insistence, while word was quietly sent ahead and a physician summoned to see to the wound properly. It was there, with the door closed and the noise of the hall a low hum through the floorboards, that I told her the rest of it plainly, without dressing any part of it finer than it deserved. The crown, the council's rot, 3 of its 12 members now suspected of the kind of ambition that sells a king's route to raiders for coin. The marriage brokered by no one, because I had refused every match my counsel proposed for 6 years running, certain, in some part of myself I couldn't have explained until 4 nights ago, that I was waiting for something I hadn't yet found a name for. The mark and what it meant, and what it had done the moment she stood at my shoulder instead of behind it. "I'm not offering you a crown," I said when I'd finished. "I know what a crown did to your last engagement, and I won't insult you by pretending mine is different simply because it comes with a warmer name for the same weight. I'm offering you a man who would rather be steadied by you than obeyed by anyone in that hall downstairs. Whatever you decide, that offer doesn't come with conditions." She was quiet a long moment, turning it over the way she'd turned over every true thing I'd told her these last 4 days, unhurried, exacting, refusing to be rushed into feeling anything she hadn't earned the right to feel yet. "I walked out on one man who wanted to own me," she said finally. "I'm not walking into an arrangement with another, crown or not. I want that understood before anything else gets said tonight." "Understood. I'd rather have you angry and honest than agreeable and false. I've had 6 years of agreeable and false from everyone at that council table, and I can tell you now it's a poor substitute for the 4 days I've just had with you." Something that might have been the beginning of a smile moved at the corner of her mouth, guarded still, but real. "You're a terrible liar, you know." "Cass, I nearly called you on it the first night, before I decided I didn't actually want to know yet." "Why didn't you?" "Because you looked like a man who needed one night of not being anyone in particular, and I understood that better than most. I just walked out of my own wedding for the same reason." She looked at the place beneath my collar where the mark still ran faintly warm, and then at me, steady as she'd been with the branch on the road. "What happens now if I say yes to this, whatever this is? Not the crown, you. What does that actually look like?" "It looks like a king who spent his whole reign half a degree off the direction he was meant to be facing, finally walking straight, because you're the one standing at the end of the road." I let that sit, then added quieter, "It looks like whatever we build it to be. I'm not asking you to become a queen overnight. I'm asking you to let me court you properly, on ground you chose, at whatever pace you set, and to know that the 4 days I had with you before any of this were the truest 4 days of my life, crown or no crown." She held my eyes a long moment, and I watched the last of the guard come down, not all at once, not easily, but honestly, the way everything about her had been honest since the moment she'd pressed her palm to my wound and told me not to be brave about it. "All right," she said, "properly. On my terms." A pause, and then, dry as the branch she'd carried the whole last mile, "And I'm keeping the stick." We went down to the common hall together some while later, once the physician had finished with the wound and pronounced it healing clean, and I did not make a ceremony of what came next, because ceremony was never what this deserved. I simply took her hand, her true name given to me at last on the stairs, quiet as a secret finally worth telling. Wren no longer a name that would do for tonight, but the whole truth of who she was, and walked into a common room full of drovers and merchants and my own kneeling guard, and said it plainly, in front of all of them, that whatever any traveler had heard about a wounded guardsman on the pass road, they should know instead that Imberfall's king had found something on that coach worth more than the strongbox any raider had taken from it. A woman who'd asked for nothing, offered everything, and never once, in 4 days of not knowing who I was, treated me as anything but a man worth saving. The hall went quiet, then loud with a different kind of noise, my captain, grinning despite himself. A drover near the fire raising his cup in a toast to a story he'd be retelling for years. Wren, beside me, not blushing, not overwhelmed, simply steady, the way she had been steady through every hour since the coach window. She still keeps the branch from the pass road. Had it mounted, eventually, over the hearth in our private rooms at Imberfall's keep, unpolished, plain, no plaque, no gilding, no explanation offered to the visitors who ask about it. A king who was saved twice over by a woman with nothing but her own steady hands and a length of fallen wood, she says, ought to remember it exactly as it happened, and not dress the memory up finer than the truth deserved. I have never once disagreed with her. I have learned since that first night in the pass that it is rarely worth trying.